a study of QBECO for remission in people with Crohn's disease. The webinar will cover the study design and participation essentials. I'm Dr. Hal Gunn, CEO of Q Biologics. To learn more about our trial, you can go to www.qibd.com. So here are 5 things that we'll be covering in the webinar, and then following up with some questions and answers. So those 5 things are who we are at Q Biologics, what QBECO SSI is, the study details, the schedule of activities, participation requirements, and then we'll follow up with some questions and answers. So who we are. Q Biologics is a privately held biotech company based in Vancouver. There's 20 staff members at Q, and we're all dedicated to seeing if we can find a optimal way to treat Crohn's disease and other chronic inflammatory diseases. Our immunotherapy platform, which is called site-specific immunomodulation, or SSI, we believe is applicable across a wide range of chronic inflammatory diseases, including inflammatory bowel disease, that includes both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, infection, asthma, and a range of cancers. Q Biologics has completed 3 phase 2 clinical trials in Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and lung cancer with compelling results, and I'll show you some of the results in inflammatory bowel disease today. QBECO SSI. QBECO is our site-specific immunomodulator that targets the gastrointestinal tract. The QB stands for Q Biologics, and the ECO stands for E. coli. The QBECO SSI is made from inactivated E. coli. It's inactivated, so it can't cause infection, but those components of E. coli stimulate an organ-specific innate immune response in the gastrointestinal tract. QBECO is administered by simple subcutaneous injection, and it's self-administered by patients, similar in administration technique to an insulin injection. Here are the results from our last Crohn's disease study. The study was a 68-patient randomized placebo-controlled trial in patients with moderate to severe disease. Half the patients initially were randomized to receive QBECO, and the other half received placebo. And when we assessed after 8 weeks of treatment, we found a greater response, seen in red, in QBECO-treated patients than in placebo-treated patients in blue. And for patients who completed the 8 weeks of treatment, there was a 50-point difference, a 50-point greater drop in Crohn's disease activity index in QBECO-treated patients than in placebo. When we continued treating patients that were initially randomized to QBECO after 8 weeks, we found a further decrease in Crohn's disease activity index. So longer treatment seemed to improve results in a majority of patients. Here in this slide, placebo is in blue and QBECO is in red. And you can see the drop in Crohn's disease activity index. The greater the drop, the greater the response. And what this study suggests is that longer patients may continue to improve with longer treatment. And so in this coming study, we'll be looking at 52 weeks of treatment with QBECO, and we'll be assessing remission at week 16, which is the longer time point in this last study, but also at week 26, and looking to see what the optimal time point is to measure the induction of remission in patients treated with QBECO. With respect to safety, QBECO SSI was well tolerated. There were no dose-limiting toxicity in doses that were used in the study or that will be used in our upcoming study. 95% of all reported adverse events were mild or moderate, with the majority being mild. Most frequently reported adverse events were injection site reactions, similar to what you sometimes get with a travel vaccine, where you can get some tenderness or swelling at the site of injection. If that occurred, it occurred in a minority of patients. If it occurred, we simply reduced the dose, so that didn't happen again. A minority of patients had flu-like symptoms, and some patients had a transient fever lasting 12 to 24 hours. We think that latter side effect may be related to the mechanism of our drug. Our drug is designed to stimulate an innate immune response, and when the innate immune system kicks in, we hypothesize that there might be a transient fever lasting 12 to 24 hours, which can be part of our body's immune system clearing bacterial infection. There was also transient mild nausea and fatigue in some patients, and these symptoms described here typically resolved with ongoing treatment. With respect to our upcoming study, the aim is to evaluate the effect of QBECO SSI treatment on endoscopic healing and remission. So we'll be looking with colonoscopy, which is a type of endoscopy, and we're looking to assess mucosal healing in the large and small bowel. We'll be assessing clinical remission by measuring clinical symptoms, including abdominal pain and bowel movement frequency, and we'll be continuing to assess safety and tolerability. QBECO is an experimental treatment, meaning it hasn't been approved, and we'll need to treat hundreds or even thousands of patients to fully understand the safety profile of our drug. The safety profile to date has been good. This slide outlines the study design. Our upcoming study will be conducted in two separate stages. Stage 1 with 20 patients and Stage 2 with 150 patients. If you're interested in participating in the study, you can choose to participate either in Stage 1 or in Stage 2. In Stage 1, all 20 patients will receive QBECO. There will be no blinded control. In Stage 2, of the 150 patients, 100 patients will receive QBECO and 50 patients will receive placebo. In the Stage 1 study with 20 patients, all of whom will receive QBECO, there will be a screening colonoscopy done to assess eligibility for the study. And then once enrolled, there'll be a colonoscopy at week 16 of treatment, week 26 of treatment, and week 52 of treatment. And the study will end 4 weeks after treatment has stopped at week 56. Stage 2 of the study will only have one remission and induction colonoscopy, either at week 16 or at week 26, depending upon the results from the 20-patient study. We'll be looking to see whether week 16 or week 26 is the best time point to measure remission induction in the 20-patient study. We'll use that information then to determine which time point, either week 16 or week 26, will be measuring remission induction in the 150-patient study. So in that study, patients will have a colonoscopy at screening, and if they're eligible, they'll be enrolled and randomized to either QBECO or placebo, and they'll have colonoscopy at that induction time point, and again at the end of study treatment at week 52. We plan to have 5 clinical trial sites for the first stage, which is the 20-patient study. One of the trial sites will be the Gastrointestinal Research Institute in Vancouver, which is located close by to St. Paul's Hospital. We'll likely have a second site in Vernon, BC. We'll likely have a site in Alberta, and that site will probably be in Edmonton. And we'll have at least one site in Ontario, and that site will likely be in Hamilton at McMaster University. We're finalizing the study sites, and we should have that information by April 2018. The schedule activities for the first stage 20-patient study includes 10 in-person visits and 3 remote visits, the remote visits occurring by telephone. And the schedule of those visits are listed here on the slide. In the first week, there'll be 3 visits on day 1, day 2, and day 3. And those will be in-person visits as you're taught to self-inject the QBECO SSI by subcutaneous injection. The injection is given every second day, and it's a simple injection that once you are trained takes about 30 seconds to give. And you'll keep the study drug at home in your fridge. The study drug, the test fees, and study related to travel will be paid by Qu Biologics. You'll also complete and record a study journal throughout the trial. With respect to QBECO administration, in the first stage 20-patient study, there'll be no placebo, so everyone will receive QBECO. It's self-administered by subcutaneous injection with a very tiny needle, much tinier than as illustrated here. And it's injected it's injected just under the skin, either in the abdominal area or in the left or right thigh area. As I mentioned, it's similar in technique to an insulin injection and is simple and easy to self-administer. With respect to eligibility criteria, you must be at least 18 years old to join the study. You must have been diagnosed with Crohn's disease for at least 3 months. You must have active, moderate to severe disease as defined by both colonoscopy and clinical symptoms. So you must have multiple bowel movements a day and abdominal pain and active symptoms. You must be willing to follow contraception guidelines throughout the study. While there's no evidence that QBECO may have a negative impact on a growing fetus, we don't have the data about this, and so for safety's sake, you must follow contraceptive guidelines while you're in the study. In order to join the study, you must not have had biologics such as Remicade or Humira. For 60 days prior to the start of the study. If you would like to start the study and you're currently taking Remicade, Humira, Entyvio, or Stelara, you can discontinue treatment with those drugs and start the trial at least 60 days later, 60 days after your last dose. Those drugs all suppress immune function. QBECO SSI is designed to restore innate immune function so that they might work in contradistinction to each other. And that's why we don't use those drugs at the same time as QBECO that's designed to restore innate immune function. You can't enter the study if you anticipate that you'll require major surgical intervention during the period of the study. And you can't join the study if you're currently experiencing an active infection with C. difficile, although if you take antibiotics and clear that infection, then you would be eligible for the study. The next steps, by the end of March, we should have a pre-screening questionnaire up on our website at www.qibd.com, and that pre-screening questionnaire will help answer the question as to whether you might be eligible for the study. Prior to that pre-screening questionnaire being up on our website, we invite you to email us with your interest in participating in the trial at info@qibd.com. You can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and please have a look at our website, www.qubd.com, for more information about our study. And now we'll respond to some of the questions that came through on our webinar from people living with Crohn's disease. And joining me for this session is Jim Penkovich, who's Q Biologics VP of Clinical Operation and Drug Development. So, Jim, over to you for our first question.
Thanks, Hal. Thanks for the presentation. So we've got a number of questions we'll go through. The first is, if the disease is only in the small bowel, how will the effects of QBECO be monitored?
Thanks, Jim. The colonoscopy, which is done at screening and at specific time points throughout the study, will also be looking at the end of the small bowel. So although it will be looking at the entire colon, the endoscope will go up into the small bowel and assess activity in the ileum or the small bowel as well.
Thanks, Hal. The next question is, please describe the adverse events.
Why don't you answer that, Jim, since you're our drug development VP?
Thanks, Hal. So Dr. Gunn had described it earlier in the presentation. As QBECO SSI is an investigational agent, we are still continuing to accumulate information about the adverse effects of the product. Hal has described the most commonly reported adverse effects being local site reactions as well as flu-like symptoms, and we'll continue to capture, and we expect those types of mild to moderate symptoms to be what we expect in our next clinical trial. We will continue to monitor that, and that will be part of the important part of our next clinical trial. We'll be gathering additional information about the adverse events.
And one thing to note is that people do have an adverse event like a local injection site reaction. We have built into the study protocol reducing the dose so that you don't have that local injection site reaction with a reduced dose.
Thanks, Al. The next question is, do you anticipate increased effectiveness in certain subsets of Crohn patients, for example, those with pathogenic invasive E. coli?
That's a very good question. Our treatment works to restore innate immune function. And although it's derived from components of E. coli, it stimulates an innate immune response rather than an adaptive immune response. And the innate immune response is nonspecific, so it isn't designed to specifically clear E. coli. That innate immune response, once activated, can clear a wide range of pathogens, including a wide range of bacterial species like MAP, for example. We anticipate that innate immune response would clear a wide range of bacterial pathogens, as well as viral and fungal pathogens as well. One interesting aspect of our treatment is that we think there may be a link to genetics, and we found a correlation in our last study that we are looking to confirm in this study between genetics and response to QBECO. Based on the data from our last study, we think that a majority of Crohn's disease patients may have the genetic predisposition to respond to our QBECO SSI.
Next question is, if all goes well with the clinical trials, how long until QBECO SSI comes to market for Crohn's disease?
Tim, why don't you answer that one?
Thanks, Hal. So as we had talked about earlier, our product is actually an investigational agent that's in the phase 2 clinical development program. One of the aspects of clinical development is it can be a long time in terms of the actual process, in terms of understanding how the product works and how we can actually put the information together that allows both the patients and physicians to be able to utilize the product safely. Realistically, it will be several years before the product will actually complete the clinical trials and get marketing authorization approval from a health board to be able to have it available for patients. Until then, the product will be available through participation in clinical trials. Next question is this a permanent fix to an innate immune deficiency, or do patients need to take QBECO SSI indefinitely?
That's a very good question. Current treatments for Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis suppress the adaptive immune system and must be taken on an ongoing basis for as long as the treatment works. Unfortunately, loss of response often occurs to those immunosuppressive drugs, so you're switched to another immunosuppressive drug until it stops working as well. We treat the disease in a very different way. Our goal is to restore innate immune function. In people with Crohn's disease have reduced innate immune function, and while there's no clear consensus on the cause of Crohn's disease, many researchers are now thinking about the disease in terms of an innate immune system suppression or dysregulation, with an inability to clear bacterial infection and dysbiosis developing, and then the adaptive immune system then reacting to that bacterial infection. Suppressing that adaptive immune response, unfortunately, doesn't address the underlying innate immune system dysregulation and suppression, or the bacterial infection and dysbiosis. And so typically, when you stop treatment with immunosuppressive drugs, symptoms come back again. Our treatment is designed differently. Our treatment is designed to restore innate immune function and to clear bacterial infection and dysbiosis that may be an important underlying factor in Crohn's disease. Once that infection is cleared, and as I mentioned earlier, we think it potentially, our treatment can clear infection with a wide range of pathogens. Once that infection is cleared, we believe there's nothing left for the adaptive immune response to be triggered. And we're hopeful that our treatment may, at least in a portion of patients, create sustain remission off of medications. In the first 12 patients that we treated more than 6 years ago now, 5 of those 12 patients with moderate to severe inflammatory bowel disease are still in remission now more than 6 years after completing a 3 to 11 month course of QBECO treatment. In this study, we'll be treating with QBECO for 12 months.
So our next question is kind of related to the answer you just gave to the previous question. If stopping Remicade, Humira, Entyvio, or Stelara to join the trial, which may result in a flare-up, how long will it take for the drug to take effect?
That's a good question. In our last study, we found that some patients responded quite quickly to our drug with improved symptoms within a week or two of starting treatment. Other patients took longer to respond to treatment, and as we mentioned in the presentation, response continued in the majority of patients right through to 16 weeks of treatment. So the question of how long it might take to respond in a particular patient is something that we're still exploring and will be an important part of this study.
Next question is, which genes seem to be correlated to QBECO response?
Great question. The genes correlated with QBECO response are of high relevance to our drug's mechanism. They're genes that control innate immune response, particularly around innate immune response and the clearance of bacterial infections. So those genes that are correlated with QBECO response are of high relevance to our drug's mechanism of action.
Will QBECO SSI treatment also control infections with fungus?
As I mentioned earlier, QBECO is designed to restore innate immune function, and that innate immune response is nonspecific. So it's not specific to E. coli. It can, once activated, has the potential to clear infection with a wide range of bacterial species and also viral and fungal pathogens.
There are a number of questions related to the trial logistics. So the first is, when can we anticipate the trials to begin, and when can we anticipate the stage 1 trial to begin?
We have received approval from Health Canada for the start of the trial. We anticipate that the first site, which will be the Gastrointestinal Research Institute in Vancouver, will be operational in March. And then the other sites we anticipate will be operational in April or potentially early May.
Can patients from the United States participate in the initial 20-patient Canada trial?
Our study in Canada, the insurance for the study is limited only to patients who are resident in Canada and have insurance, health insurance through the provincial health insurance plan. So unfortunately, the U.S. patients can't join our 20-patient study, but are very welcome to join our follow-on 150-patient study. We'll have multiple trial sites in the U.S. and also likely trial sites in Europe as well.
If I don't live within driving distance of a trial site, will I have to pay for my travel to the site?
If it's feasible for you to enter the trial, Q will pay for all travel expenses, including a car or, in some cases, flight, if one of the trial sites is accessible for you from your place of residence by flight.
Another question related to the second stage of the clinical trial. When do you anticipate having the trial sites for the second 150-patient trial up and running in the U.S.?
The second trial is funding dependent, so we're currently raising money to initiate that 150 patient study. That study could begin as early as the end of this year, the end of 2018.
Is deep endoscopic remission going to be the endpoint for your next study as opposed to CDAI score, as is the gold standard for response to treatment?
In our last study, we used the Crohn's Disease Activity Index, which is mostly a symptom measurement score. In this coming study, we'll be looking at endoscopic healing, which is the most objective endpoint to assess response to treatment. And we'll also be looking at clinical symptoms as well a specific biomarker response or immune markers in the blood.
Can we get compassionate treatment after the trial if response to the experimental treatment during the trial is good?
Did you want to answer that question, Jim?
Sure. So as part of our clinical trial, again, reminder, it's in 2 stages. The first 20 patients will actually all receive QBECO, and we will work with the regulators to try and make the drug available, if possible, after the end of the clinical trial for patients that have had a response. Again, there's no guarantee that the regulators will allow that, but that's something we know is important for patients, and we'll continue to work with them to try and achieve that as we go through the study. Are patients tested for MAP infection levels before and after QBECO SSI?
We won't be testing people for MAP infection before and after SSI, but as I mentioned, our treatment is designed to restore innate immune function, so we're hopeful that if patients do have a MAP infection, that by restoring innate immune function, the immune system will be capable of clearing MAP infection. One of the reasons that Crohn's disease patients might have a higher incidence of MAP infection is because their innate immune system is suppressed. So when we restore innate immune function, we anticipate the innate immune system will be capable of clearing bacterial pathogens that shouldn't be there.
Now, we have a number of questions with regard to eligibility for participation in the study. Does the severity of inflammation at the time of the initial colonoscopy determine whether someone is admitted into the study?
In order to join the study, you have to have both the symptoms of Crohn's disease, so increased number of bowel movements and abdominal pain, and active disease on colonoscopy. So evidence when the gastroenterologist looks with with endoscopy that there's active ulceration and inflammation.
So that's related to the next question. If a patient has symptoms and blood work supports active disease, but colonoscopy is clear, would they still qualify to be in the study?
You have to have both active symptoms and evidence of inflammation on colonoscopy to be able to enter the study.
If I have a looping ileostomy, can I participate in the trial?
Unfortunately, that is an exclusion criteria for the study. You can have a history of small bowel resection as long as you're not symptomatic from having too much of your small bowel removed. But if you have an ostomy, then you'd be excluded from being in the study.
And finally, will ulcerative colitis patients be eligible for the trial?
In our ulcerative colitis study that completed, we showed we had a 73% response rate, and we showed histological improvement on colonoscopy. So we are excited about the potential of our treatment in ulcerative colitis. But in this trial will only Crohn's disease patients will be eligible for this specific upcoming trial.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gunn. That brings us to the end of the question and answer period. We would like to thank all of the participants who signed on for the webinar today. And we would like to remind those that would like additional information or to be able to follow us for additional information regarding this clinical trial at QIBD.com. If you're interested in participating in the upcoming clinical trial or require additional information, you can email us at info@QIBD.com. And again, I'd like to thank Dr. Gunn for his presentation today and for your attention and questions that hopefully we've answered for you. Thanks again from Q Biologics.
Thanks, everyone.